Hello, it's your boy Julian, back again for another video.
Everybody's going to the party and we're having a good time, and I'm feeling alright tonight. With a better judgment.
In 2008, Christopher Drew Engel was 17 years old, dominating MySpace charts, performing his single Big City Dreams on TRL, and hot off the heels of his first EP, the Yippie EP. At this point, with only one other release under his belt, which was the demo Shmemo, he had pretty much become the quintessential archetype of electro/acoustic MySpace artists at the time. Once 2008 and the Yippie EP came around, everyone's MySpace acoustic project was shortened to one word with an exclamation point at the end. Everyone had the same swoopy emo hair, maybe with a bandana around it or something, and shutter shades. Even the style of the music was changing to a point where everyone seemed to be doing their own versions of Christopher Drew's work. Everyone was trying to capture the vibe of songs like Here Goes Nothing.
Check 1 2. Alright, here goes nothing.
Wait a second. Let's count this up. 1, 2, 3. Let's go!
Or try to do their best Chris Drew falsetto impersonation. While I doubt Mr. Engel was the first person to brainstorm all of these trends, he was the first one who summed up the vibe and aesthetic of this era perfectly. After all, it's not who does it first, in my opinion, but who does it best. This was a year or two before Chris started abandoning his auto-tune, synthy, electroacoustic pop ways, incorporating chain smoking and marijuana use into his image and shifting his music style to a chiller, acoustic style, inspired heavily by Peace and Love, and the Beatles and Bob Dylan and the Beach Boys, before eventually taking even bigger risks with 2011's psychedelic rock-inspired Time Travel. You see, Chris Drew kind of informally resigned as the head chief of MySpace culture around 2010 with the release of his Warner Brothers debut record, What Is Love? After a stint headlining the AP tour in 2010 with openers Hey Monday, Every Avenue, The Cab, and the Somerset, accompanied with an AP magazine cover story, followed immediately after by a stint on that summer's whole entire Warped Tour, the then 19-year-old singer seemed to desire to stray away from the Warped Tour alternative press scene, often hating on his old music in interviews, as well as at one point flirting with the idea of changing the name to Christopher Drew and the Shout, which never actually happened. Chris seemed angsty about his past, and perhaps about his influence, opening the door for thousands of typically 17-year-old white boys across America to strap on an acoustic guitar with peace signs sharpied onto it, straightening their hair and singing heavily auto-tuned jargon about falling in love with girls over synth lines with electro beats. Most of these copycats seem to have been lost to time, only existing for maybe a few years, although once making an impact on heartbroken MySpace-savvy teenagers, now rests in the very back of the brains of those kids who are now in their early to mid-20s, much like myself. So, I am here to dive into some of the forgotten Christopher Drew copycats, because I know I can't be the only one who remembers this era of music and culture and still appreciates it, cringy as it may be. Alright, number 1, Steven Jerzak.
Your eyes are blue like the ocean, baby, I'm lost out at sea. Did the sun just come out or did you smile at me?
Oh, sweet Steven Jerzak. Where art thou? Probably the number 1 Christopher Drew copycat back in the day. No disrespect to you, Steven Jerzak, your song slapped and you had a great voice. In the year 2009, a 17-year-old fresh-faced Steven Jerzak released the Sky High EP, as well as the Peace, Love, Truth EP featuring standout tracks such as Cute and Time Bomb, definitely drawing influence heavily from the Yippie EP era Never Shout Never, as well as bands like All Time Low and Boys Like Girls. After racking up hundreds of thousands of MySpace plays, he signed to Universal Republic Records in January 2010, still at age 17. The following year, he released his first and only full-length, Miles and Miles. Now, much like Christopher Drew, Steven Jerzak changed his image as well as his musical style at this time, but unlike Chris Engel, Jerzak ditched acoustic guitars for the most part and went for a more clean-cut, straight-laced, major label pop direction. From what I remember, the Miles and Miles album did not do too well or make much of a splash in the scene, despite performing on the entire 2011 Vans Warped Tour. The album did not have the charm of Jerzak's older MySpace jams, and Steven has kept a pretty low profile since the release of this album. Where are you, Steven? Let's get some new music, huh? What about that? What you been up to, homie? Next up, Katy Groves. Boy, I fucking loved Katy Groves. Tracks like One and the Same or A Town Like This were undeniably good. I was hella about her shit back in the day, still am. I remember her often being referred to as the female counterpart to Christopher Drew, and despite similarities in vocal melodies and overall aesthetic, Katy Groves had plenty of her own talent and charm to go around, and her songs were miles above the quality of most acoustic MySpace artists during this time, in my opinion. In 2009, she released her first EP, entitled A Month of Sundays, and in 2010 released the 8-song The Life of a Pirate, featuring the hit song One and the Same. In that same year, she signed her to a major label, RCA Records, and toured with the likes of Third Eye Blind, Good Charlotte, and All Time Low. So obviously things were going good for Katy Groves at the time. Promising future ahead of her. I mean, come on, that's a lot of hype. Third Eye Blind? Her first major label release, which was an EP titled This Little Girl, came out in 2012. And much like Steven Jerzak's full-length, it didn't seem to share the same richness as her old music, causing her career to seemingly lose steam after this release. She's kept a pretty low profile since then, besides an EP she released in 2015 entitled Dreams. If there's anything I'm noticing from the trajectories of these MySpace artists, maybe it's best, or it would have been best, for major labels to stop trying to turn them into mainstream pop artists. It obviously didn't go too well for really any of them. But still, Katy Groves is fucking awesome. She was sick. Fuck yeah, Katy Groves. Yes, Stephen Barnes. Little is known about Stephen Barnes, at least that's the way it seems to me. I don't know where he's from, I don't know his story, and I don't know what he's up to now, but he was a MySpace kid, and I remembered him as the other Steven spelled with a PH, the other being Steven Jerzak. However, My Darling, My Dear is a great song and truly captured the vibe of that era well, despite being a bit derivative. Hats off to you, Stephen Barnes, wherever you may be. Alright. Plug-in Stereo was the name of the solo electro-tinged acoustic project of yet another 17-year-old, Trevor Dahl. Plug-in Stereo's demo, which was released in 2009, featured the same electroacoustic pop that was dominating MySpace at the time. However, his EP from later that same year, titled I Would Be If I Was, features a bit of a folkier sound on some tracks, as well as some Death Cab for Cutie vibes on other songs. I personally loved his 2011 full-length Nothing to Something back in the day, featuring the hit Oh Darling with the guest vocals from Katy Groves on it. Plug-in Stereo's songs were truly refreshing, infectious, and honest. While Trevor no longer makes music under the name Plug-in Stereo, he is currently finding success with his Chainsmokers-esque DJ crew called Cheat Codes, and apparently he is currently working on his first solo album under his own name. Ah yes. We're all familiar with the band who signed to Fueled by Ramen to release their successful breezy pop rock debut record On Your Side in 2009, featuring the unexpected country-tinged hit Like We Used To. But before A Rocket to the Moon was signed to one of the biggest labels in the scene and touring full-time, making waves, A Rocket to the Moon was originally the solo project of Braintree, Massachusetts native Nick Santino, who released the lesser-known full-length Your Best Idea in 2006.
So wake up, she said, I never left, I'm here, she said.
As well as the uber-catchy Summer 07 EP the following year. These releases are maybe a bit more on the Owl City tip than Never Shout Never, however the aesthetics and ideas remain the same. Heavily auto-tuned vocals over electro beats with acoustic guitar and synthesizers galore. Despite the trends he was following at the time, Nick made some good music, I would say, and it seemed to be all but forgotten about nowadays. Some quality tracks from this era, in my opinion, include A Song for Brit, Baby We're Invincible, which has a great music video, and Are You Catching My Drift Yet? Much like A Rocket to the Moon, the Ready Set rose to prominence in 2010, after signing to Sire, as well as Pete Wentz's Decadence Records, and releasing his major label debut, titled I'm Alive, I'm Dreaming, which featured smash hit single Love Like Whoa, which was arguably a bigger song than any MySpace artist had at the time, besides maybe Trouble or Can't Stand It by Never Shout Never, but those weren't even like mainstream hits, really. Christopher Drew never really made it to that mainstream hit level like the Ready Set did. Was this the biggest song of that era? I don't know. I can't think of anything. I don't know. I should have thought about that. I don't know. It was huge, though. That was a really big song. 2010, remember that shit? Love Like Whoa? Girls Gotta Love Like Whoa? That was huge. Obviously a big feat for the then 21-year-old Jordan Witzegruder. But before this stardom, he released various EPs through MySpace.com, as well as self-releasing his debut full-length called Tantrum Castle, featuring standout tracks such as Giants, as well as my personal favorite, Tending to Turn Out Pretty Great. If you're a fan of old Owl City and Never Shout Never style music, this is me talking to you personally. And if you've never heard this album, please give it a listen right now. I love this album, and although it uses many of the synthetic electronic trends of this era, the young Jordan was really doing something unique with the sound, in my opinion, making it sound super genuine and truly his own. No wonder the Ready Set absolutely blew up a year later. I think it was well deserved. Alright, so these are just some artists from that era. The title of this video might have been a bit misleading, because not all of these artists are truly forgotten, and many were quite big, but I'm more referring to their music they made in their bedrooms by themselves before the big records that they made, you know, the ones that were really big on MySpace, and the songs that the style sounds pretty dated at this point, and most people look back at it and laugh, I guess, but I remember that time very well. I was very into that style of music when I was in middle school, and it definitely left an impression on me, and I still look back on it fondly, despite all the auto-tune and hairspray. So, I might make a part 2 of this video featuring even smaller artists during this time that I can remember. If you know of any that you might want me to talk about, please let me know. But either way, I hope you enjoyed this. This was fun to make. It was fun to dive into these artists that I feel like people don't really talk about much anymore. And seeing as how all this stuff was 10 years ago, maybe it's time for a revival of this sound, of this style, of this aesthetic. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But yeah. So, without talking too much, this has been Julian. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again next week for more awesome scene YouTube content. Well, I don't know if it's that awesome, but it definitely exists and is made by me and is about stuff relating to, but not limited to, scene kids. Okay, have a nice day. Peace.
Although the distance is daring, I sure know what it's like to